8 tons. That's what it lifted in a single scoop. Rock, mud, clay, boulders, all of it compressed into a 5 cubic yard steel bucket, swinging through tropical air at the end of a 40-foot boom. The bucket rose, rotated, opened. 8 tons of earth fell into a waiting railcar. Then it swung back and bit again. This was the Bucyrus 95-ton steam shovel. And in 1906, in a trench called the Culebra Cut, 102 of these machines were tearing through the spine of Central America, or trying to do what the French had failed to do for 20 years. Split a continent, connect 2 oceans, build the Panama Canal. But here's what the photographs don't show you. The ones with Theodore Roosevelt sitting in the operator's seat, grinning for the camera during a torrential downpour. The iconic images of American industrial might conquering nature. They don't show you what happened on December 12, 1908, at Bas Obispo, when 22 tons of dynamite exploded prematurely, when the hillside tore itself apart. When a 95-ton steam shovel, the most powerful earth-moving machine ever built, was buried under a mountain of falling rock in seconds. The entire crew inside, gone. Between 1904 and 1914, these machines moved 232 million cubic yards of earth. That's enough dirt to bury Manhattan under 12 feet of rubble. They did the work of 50,000 men with pickaxes. They made the impossible possible. But they also killed. Not occasionally, regularly. Because when you're operating a 95-ton machine powered by 125 pounds per square inch of steam pressure, mounted on rails that can't dodge landslides, digging through rock laced with unexploded dynamite in 120-degree heat, someone pays the price. 5,609 workers died building the Panama Canal during the American phase. That's more than died in most wars. And the steam shovels, the machines that made it all possible, were at the center of it. If you enjoy these stories of industrial history, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. Now let's go back to 1904, back to when America inherited a French disaster and decided to finish it with machines the world had never seen before. Chapter 2. The problem nobody could solve. The French tried first. 1881 to 1889. They brought 20,000 workers. They brought European engineering expertise. They brought the confidence of the men who'd built the Suez Canal. They failed spectacularly. 22,000 dead, most from yellow fever and malaria. The rest from landslides, accidents, and the simple fact that they were trying to dig through a mountain range with pickaxes and wheelbarrows. The problem wasn't just the disease, it was the geology. The Culebra Cut, the 9-mile stretch through the Continental Divide, required removing 100 million cubic yards of earth and rock. The French managed to move 30 million in 8 years before they went bankrupt. The math was brutal. A man with a pickaxe and wheelbarrow could move maybe 2 cubic yards of earth per day. You'd need 50,000 men working simultaneously for a decade just to match what the steam shovels would eventually do in 10 years. And the terrain fought back. The rock wasn't stable. It was volcanic, sedimentary, clay-heavy. When you cut into it, it moved. Landslides were constant. The Cucaracha slide in 1907 dumped 500,000 cubic yards of mud into the cut overnight, burying everything. America took over in 1904. President Theodore Roosevelt understood something the French didn't. You couldn't dig the Panama Canal with muscle. You needed machines. Specifically, you needed the most powerful earth-moving machines ever built. Enter the steam shovel. Not the small construction shovels used for building foundations, the monsters, the 95-ton Bucyrus, the 91-ton Marion, machines that stood 20 feet tall, stretched 50 feet long, and could bite 8 tons of earth in a single scoop. These weren't new inventions. William Smith Otis had built the first steam shovel in 1835 at age 22. He died of typhoid at 26, never seeing what his invention would become. By 1900, as Bucyrus Foundry in South Milwaukee and Marion Steam Shovel Company in Ohio were building machines for railroads and mines. But nobody had ever deployed them at this scale. Nobody had ever asked them to dig through a mountain range in tropical heat with landslides burying them daily. The Americans ordered 102 steam shovels, 77 from Bucyrus, 24 from Marion, and they shipped them to Panama with a simple mandate: dig until you hit ocean. Chapter 3. The Beast. Picture a machine the size of a railroad car, 50 feet long, 20 feet wide when the stabilizing outriggers were deployed. 95 tons of cast iron gears, riveted steel plates, and wrought iron tension rods. The base sat on standard gauge railroad tracks, 4 feet 8.5 inches apart. The machine couldn't turn, couldn't pivot. It could only move forward or backward along the rails. When it needed to change position, just a ground crew of 6 men had to manually lift and relay the heavy iron tracks in front of it. The boiler was horizontal, tubular, generating 100 to 150 horsepower at 110 to 125 pounds per square inch. It held 1,500 gallons of water and burned through coal at a staggering rate. 2 firemen shoveled constantly, feeding the beast, keeping the pressure up. The boom stretched 40 feet from the base. At the end hung the dipper bucket, 5 cubic yards, steel teeth along the bottom edge. When it bit into earth, it bit hard. Here's how it worked. The engineer, the boss, sat in a wooden cab at the base. He controlled the primary digging action using a series of levers connected to the steam engine through a maze of gears and cables. Pull one lever and the boom lowered. Pull another and the dipper bucket dragged forward through the earth, filling itself. Then the hoist engaged. Steam pressure drove pistons that turned massive cast iron gears. The bucket rose, swung 180 degrees on a rotating platform, and positioned itself over a waiting railcar. The craneman, standing on the boom itself, 40 feet in the air, controlled the dipper door. He pulled a lever. The bottom of the bucket opened. 8 tons of rock and mud cascaded into the railcar below. The bucket swung back. The cycle repeated. Under optimal conditions, a top-tier crew could move 900 cubic yards per hour. In 1912, a Marion Model 91 set a world record by moving 5,550 cubic yards in a single shift. But optimal conditions didn't exist in the Culebra cut. The temperature was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was choked with coal smoke from the boilers and rock dust from hundreds of pneumatic drills working simultaneously. The noise was deafening. The ground was unstable, and buried in that ground were thousands of pounds of dynamite. The blasting crews would drill holes, pack them with explosives, and detonate. The steam shovels would move in to clear the rubble. But not all the dynamite exploded. Some charges misfired, some got buried, and when a steam shovel's dipper bucket struck an unexploded charge, the bucket disintegrated. The tropical heat made it worse. Dynamite sweats nitroglycerin in high temperatures. The acidic groundwater reacted with the explosives. Lightning strikes during the daily rainstorms could trigger buried charges. The combination was lethal, and the machines were sitting ducks. Mounted on rails, they couldn't dodge. Then, when a landslide started, when millions of tons of mud began moving, the crew had maybe 30 seconds to abandon the machine and run. If they didn't make it, the shovel was buried. And so were they. Chapter 4. The men who fed the beast. 4 men per machine. The engineer, the craneman, and 2 firemen, plus a ground crew of 6 laborers constantly moving rails. The engineer was the elite. He earned $167.50 to $210 per month, paid in gold with free housing. That was serious money in 1906. Unskilled laborers, primarily West Indians, made 10 cents an hour, paid in silver. The wage disparity wasn't just economic, it was racial. The Americans created a two-tier system. The wage disparity wasn't just economic, it was racial. The Americans created a two-tier system. Gold roll workers were white Americans, skilled, well-paid. Silver roll workers were black West Indians, doing the backbreaking groundwork for a fraction of the pay. Engineer controlled the machine. He sat in the wooden cab, hands on levers, watching the cut, reading the rock, judging when to push and when to back off. A good engineer could feel when the dipper was full without seeing it. He could sense when the ground was about to give way. The craneman stood on the boom, 40 feet up, exposed to the elements. His job was to control the dipper door and adjust the angle of the bucket. He had no safety harness, no railing, just his balance and his grip. When the machine swung, he swung with it. The firemen had the worst job. They stood next to the boiler in 120-degree heat, shoveling coal for 10 to 12 hours straight. Their hands blistered, their lungs filled with coal dust. If the boiler pressure dropped, the machine stopped. If the machine stopped, production stopped. So they shoveled. The ground crew laid track. Heavy iron rails, wooden ties, spikes driven by hand. When the shovel advanced, they had to pick up the rails behind it and relay them in front. Back-breaking work in mud and heat with steam shovels and locomotives constantly moving around them. There was no workers' compensation, no safety regulations. If you got hurt, you got sent to the hospital if you were lucky. If you died, your body got shipped home if they could recover it. Your job was filled the next day. But the men kept coming, because the pay was better than anything available back home, because it was the biggest construction project in human history, because working on the Panama Canal meant something, and because the alternative was worse. Unemployment, poverty, starvation. Chapter 5. The Daily Dance with Death. The landslides were the worst, not the dynamite, not the disease, the landslides. The Culebra Cut was geologically unstable. Volcanic rock, sedimentary layers, clay that turned to liquid when it rained. And it rained every day. Torrential downpours that lasted hours. When you cut into the hillside, you removed the support holding millions of tons of earth in place. That earth wanted to move, and eventually it did. The Cucaracha Slide in 1907 was the most infamous. 500,000 cubic yards of mud poured into the cut overnight. It buried rail lines, buried equipment, buried steam shovels. The machines were trapped, half submerged in liquid earth, immobile. The crews had to dig them out by hand. Weeks of work to excavate a single shovel. And while they were digging, more slides would happen. The cut would fill faster than they could empty it. But the landslides gave warning. The ground would crack, just trees would tilt. You could see it coming, usually. The dynamite didn't give warning. December 12th, 1908. Bass Obispo. A blasting crew was preparing charges. 44,000 pounds of dynamite packed into drill holes along the hillside. Standard procedure. They'd done it hundreds of times. Something went wrong. Maybe the tropical heat, maybe lightning, maybe acidic groundwater seeping into the charges. Nobody knows. The dynamite exploded prematurely. It is 22 tons of high explosive detonating simultaneously. The hillside disintegrated. Rock, mud, boulders, all of it launched into the air and came down like an avalanche. A 95-ton Bucyrus steam shovel was working directly below. The crew, 4 men, were inside. They had no time to react. The machine was buried under a mountain of falling rock in seconds. John J. Reedy, an experienced powderman, was blown to pieces while setting charges. His body was never recovered intact, or the investigation blamed worker incompetence. Chief Engineer George Goethals often did. But the real cause was the volatile combination of tropical conditions and industrial-scale explosives. Nobody had worked with dynamite at this scale in this environment before. They were learning as they went, and the tuition was paid in lives. The steam shovels themselves were dangerous. The dipper buckets frequently struck unexploded charges buried in the rubble. The bucket would explode, sending steel fragments in every direction. The craneman, standing on the boom, was directly in the blast radius. Boiler explosions were rare but catastrophic. If the water level dropped too low, the crown sheet overheated. At 100 to 25 pounds per square inch, a boiler failure was a bomb. Superheated steam and shrapnel would kill everyone within 50 feet. Railroad accidents were constant. The cut was a maze of temporary tracks, with locomotives and dirt trains moving constantly. Workers got crushed between cars, run over, or caught in coupling accidents. Arcelio Hartley, a canal worker, had his leg amputated after a railroad crushing accident. He survived, but never worked again. Between 1904 and 1914, 5,609 workers died. That's more than one death per day for 10 years straight. The steam shovel crews, the elite workers, had the highest survival rate because they were skilled and well paid. The ground crews, the labourers, the men doing the dangerous work for 10 cents an hour, they died in droves. And the machines kept digging, because stopping meant failure, and failure wasn't an option. Chapter 6. The Scale of Victory. By 1914, it was done. The Panama Canal opened on August 15th. The first ship passed through without ceremony because World War I had just started and nobody was paying attention. But the numbers were staggering. 232 million cubic yards of earth moved. That's enough to bury Manhattan under 12 feet of rubble, enough to build a pyramid twice the size of Giza. The 102 steam shovels did the work of 50,000 men with pickaxes. They made the impossible possible. One 95-ton Bucyrus could move in a day what would have taken 500 men a week. The economic impact was immediate. Ships no longer had to sail around Cape Horn, a 12,000-mile journey that took months. The canal cut the distance from New York to San Francisco by 8,000 miles. Global trade routes were permanently rewritten. The United States became a two-ocean naval power overnight. Battleships could move between the Atlantic and Pacific in days instead of months. But the strategic advantage was incalculable. But the cost: 5,609 American workers dead, 22,000 French workers dead before that, 27,609 total. That's more than died in most wars. And for what? A 50-mile ditch through a jungle. Except it wasn't just a ditch. It was the largest engineering project in human history. It proved that with enough machines, enough money, and enough willingness to accept casualties, humans could reshape continents. The steam shovels started disappearing in the 1920s, as diesel and electric-powered excavators mounted on crawler tracks were more flexible, more efficient. The railroad-mounted shovels were obsolete. Most were scrapped. A few survived. A Marion model. 91 sits abandoned in a limestone quarry in Leroy, New York. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, the last known example of its kind. A Marion Model 60 that worked on the canal is preserved at the University of Costa Rica. In Lake Goldsmith, Australia, a 1903 Bucyrus steam shovel is kept in working order, occasionally steamed up for demonstrations. But most are gone, melted down, forgotten. The machines that split a continent reduced to scrap metal. Chapter 7. What remains? The Panama Canal still operates. Over 14,000 ships pass through it every year. Most people don't think about how it was built. They don't think about the 102 steam shovels that tore through a mountain range. They don't think about the 27,609 workers who died making it possible. But the canal exists because of those machines and those men. The Bucyrus 95-ton steam shovel could do the work of 500 men. It made the economics work. It made the timeline feasible. Without it, the canal doesn't get built. Not in 1914, maybe not ever. We've built bigger machines since. Hydraulic excavators that can lift 100 tons. Bucket wheel excavators that dwarf the steam shovels. But none of them changed the world the way the Bucyrus and Marion shovels did. Because they didn't just move Earth, they proved that humans could reshape geography on a continental scale. The cost was 27,609 lives. That's the number we know about, the documented deaths. How many more died from disease after they left? How many were injured and never recovered? How many families were destroyed? We don't know. Nobody counted. But we got the canal. We got global trade routes. We got a two-ocean navy. We got proof that the impossible was just expensive. The steam shovels are gone. The men who operated them are gone. But the canal remains. 50 miles of water connecting two oceans, built by machines that could bite 8 tons of earth in a single scoop. Built by men who earned $210 a month in gold or 10 cents an hour in silver. Built on a foundation of 27,609 bodies. That's the legacy, not just what was built, what it cost to build it.